Last night, you threw away something that could wipe out every pest in your garden. Not a chemical, not a chemical trap, not any product you have to spend money on. It is just half a watermelon rind, the thing most of us toss in the trash without a second thought. But here is the strange part. Agricultural scientists have known about this mechanism for decades. Farmers in Southeast Asia and Africa have used it for hundreds of years. And the pesticide industry, an $84 billion a year industry, has done everything to make sure you never find out the truth. Why? Because if you knew that a $0 watermelon rind could do what an 80,000 VND bottle of metaldehyde cannot, and do it better, cleaner, and safer for both your garden and your family, they lose a customer. Multiply that by millions of households every year, and you understand why this knowledge was buried. In today's video, I will show you the exact science behind this $0 trap, its hidden history, and the specific steps for you to apply it tonight. And by the end of the video, I think you will never look at watermelon rinds the same way again. Last night, you threw away something that could have wiped out every pest in your garden. Not a chemical, not a commercial trap, not anything you had to spend a single dollar on, just the hollow shell of a watermelon. The thing most of us toss in the trash without a second thought. But here is what makes this strange. Agricultural scientists have understood this mechanism for decades. Farmers across Southeast Asia and Africa used it for hundreds of years before that. And the pesticide industry, an $84 billion industry, has done everything in its power to make sure you never find out. Why? Because if you knew that a $0 watermelon rind could outperform a $20 bottle of metaldehyde, cleaner, safer, and with benefits that no chemical on the market can replicate, you would stop buying. Multiply that by millions of households every single year, and you begin to understand exactly why this knowledge was buried. What you are about to see is not a gardening hack. It is a piece of ancient ecological engineering that was systematically erased from modern agriculture textbooks the moment synthetic chemicals became profitable. A technique so effective that a single hollow rind, placed upside down in your garden bed at night, can collect dozens of slugs, beetles, and soil pests by morning, while simultaneously drawing earthworms up from deep in the soil to work the ground beneath it. Tonight, I am going to show you the science, the history, and the exact steps to use it. And I promise, by the end of this video, you will never look at watermelon scraps the same way again. To understand why this works, you have to go back further than most gardening channels are willing to go. Not to last decade, not to the organic farming movement of the 1970s. You have to go back centuries, to the farmers who had no choice but to be brilliant with nothing. In the river delta regions of Southeast Asia, particularly in what is now Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia, smallholder farmers had been practicing what modern ecologists now call refuge trapping long before the term ever existed in a scientific journal. They understood through generations of careful observation that certain organic materials placed on the soil surface at night would concentrate soil pests in predictable locations by morning. Fermented fruit rinds, rotting vegetable scraps, hollowed gourds left upside down between crop rows. These were not accidents. They were precision tools, refined over hundreds of planting seasons, passed down not in textbooks but in the quiet language of farmers talking to their children at the edge of a field. The same pattern appeared independently in West Africa, where farmers in Ghana and Nigeria used overripe pawpaw skins and fermented cassava peels as overnight bait stations for millipedes and cutworms. Researchers documenting traditional agriculture practices in the 1960s recorded these methods in detail, noting that local pest capture rates using organic lure traps often exceeded 70% reduction in surface pest populations over a single week. 70%. With kitchen scraps. Then something happened, and the timing is not a coincidence. In 1945, the Second World War ended. The enormous chemical manufacturing infrastructure that had been built to produce nerve agents, explosives, and industrial poisons suddenly had no war to feed. The solution was elegant from a business perspective and catastrophic from an ecological one. Repurpose the chemistry. DDT had already been introduced as an insecticide in 1943. Organophosphate compounds derived directly from nerve agent research were reformulated into commercial pesticides within years of the war's end. By the early 1950s, the global agricultural chemical industry was born, not from a need that farmers expressed, but from a surplus of weapons technology looking for a new market. The knowledge did not disappear overnight, but the infrastructure around it did. Agricultural universities, heavily funded by the emerging agrochemical sector, shifted their curricula toward chemical solutions. Extension programs that had taught traditional integrated pest management were defunded or redirected. The journals that published research on organic lure traps were gradually crowded out by studies funded by companies with a financial interest in selling bottles, not teaching techniques. By the 1980s, a farmer in Iowa or the Mekong Delta who asked their local agricultural advisor about fermented bait traps would most likely be handed a product catalog instead of an answer. This is not speculation. A 1987 report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations explicitly documented the erosion of traditional pest management knowledge across developing nations, linking it directly to the aggressive marketing of synthetic pesticides by multinational corporations throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The report used a phrase that has stayed with researchers ever since: the displacement of ecological literacy, not the replacement of inferior methods with superior ones. The displacement of working knowledge by profitable products, and somewhere in that displacement, the watermelon rind was forgotten. Let us talk about the money, because once you understand the financial architecture behind what you buy at your local garden store, the disappearance of a $0 solution stops feeling like an accident and starts feeling like a strategy. The global pesticide market was valued at $84 billion in 2023, not $84 million. Billion. That number is projected to reach $130 billion by 2031, growing at a steady rate that the industry describes in its own investor reports as resilient demand. Resilient demand is a polite way of saying that no matter how many studies emerge about soil degradation, chemical runoff, or collateral damage to beneficial insects, farmers and gardeners keep buying. The system is designed to make sure they keep buying. Now consider what you actually spend when you walk into a garden center to deal with slugs and surface pests. A standard 500-gram box of metaldehyde-based slug pellets runs between $18 and $25 in most Western markets. In Vietnam and Southeast Asia, equivalent molluscicide products sell for 60,000 to 120,000 Vietnamese dong per application cycle. These products need to be reapplied after rain. They degrade in sunlight. They have a shelf life. And here is the detail that does not appear on the label. Metaldehyde is acutely toxic to dogs, cats, hedgehogs, and birds that consume poison slugs. It does not discriminate. It kills what it contacts, including the earthworms that your soil depends on to survive. The $84 billion industry knows this. The safety data sheets know this. And yet the product remains on shelves in 57 countries because the regulatory threshold for acceptable risk was written in an era when the alternative, teaching people to use watermelon rinds, was not considered a legitimate competitor. This is the part of the video where I want you to feel something specific, not just frustration at a faceless corporation, something more personal than that. Think about every time you walked through your garden after a rain and found your seedlings destroyed by slugs overnight. Think about every bag of pellets you bought, every season you repeated the same cycle, every time the problem came back because you were treating a symptom rather than understanding a system. You were not failing as a gardener. You were operating inside a framework that was built to make you dependent. Dependent on a product, dependent on a supply chain, dependent on an industry that generates $84 billion precisely because you do not know what a farmer in the Mekong Delta knew 300 years ago. That is the identity shift I want to offer you in this video. You are not a consumer of gardening products. You are a steward of a living system, and living systems do not need $84 billion worth of chemistry to function. They need observation, timing, and the willingness to use what is already in your hands. The watermelon rind is not a trick. It is a reminder of who you were before the industry told you that you needed their help. Now let us get into the science, because this is the part where the watermelon rind stops being a folk remedy and becomes something far more interesting: a precision ecological trap engineered by nature itself and refined by human observation over centuries. It starts with chemistry. A watermelon rind, the moment it is separated from the fruit and exposed to open air, begins a process called anaerobic fermentation. The residual sugars clinging to the inner flesh, primarily fructose, glucose, and the amino acid citrulline, which is uniquely abundant in watermelon, begin to break down in contact with naturally occurring microbes on the rind's surface. Within 4 to 6 hours of being placed cut side down on warm soil, the rind begins producing a measurable output of carbon dioxide, ethanol, and short-chain ester compounds. These are the same volatile organic compounds produced by overripe and decaying fruit anywhere in nature. And to the sensory system of a slug, they are essentially a dinner bell. Slugs, and particularly the gray field slug, Doroceras reticulatum, which is responsible for the majority of vegetable garden damage across temperate and tropical growing regions, navigate almost entirely by chemoreception. They have no eyes capable of forming images. They have no ears. What they have are extraordinarily sensitive chemoreceptor cells concentrated in their upper and lower tentacles, capable of detecting dissolved chemical gradients at concentrations as low as a few parts per million. When fermentation begins beneath a watermelon rind, the CO2 and ester plume diffuses outward through the soil surface in a radius that researchers at Wageningen University estimated in a 2019 study on volatile-based slug attractants can extend up to 1.2 meters from the source under standard nighttime humidity conditions. Every slug within that radius receives the same signal. Food is here, shelter is here, move toward it. The shelter component is not incidental. It is the second half of the trap, and it is just as important as the chemical lure. Slugs are extraordinarily vulnerable to desiccation, the loss of body moisture to dry air. During daylight hours, a slug exposed on open soil can lose enough moisture to become lethally dehydrated within 30 to 40 minutes, depending on temperature and humidity. This is why they are nocturnal. This is why they disappear by morning. They are not leaving your garden. They are hiding in it, pressed beneath debris, inside soil cracks, under any surface that offers darkness and retained moisture. The inverted watermelon rind provides exactly this environment. The curved shell creates a sealed microhabitat, dark, humid from the respiring flesh above, and saturated with fermentation volatiles that continue to signal safety and food simultaneously. To a slug, crawling beneath that rind is not a trap. It feels like arriving home. By morning, you are not hunting pests. You are harvesting them from a location you chose. But here is where the science becomes genuinely remarkable, because the watermelon rind does not stop working when the sun comes up. The decomposing flesh, now pressed against warm soil and beginning its second stage of microbial breakdown, starts releasing a different chemical profile. Nitrogen-rich compounds, dissolved sugars migrating downward through moisture, microbial metabolites that alter the immediate soil chemistry beneath the rind. And this second chemical signal reaches a completely different audience, one that is not a pest at all. Earthworms, specifically the epigeic and endogeic species that inhabit the upper 15 to 30 centimeters of garden soil, the zone where root systems live and where soil structure matters most. Earthworms locate food sources through chemoreception in a manner functionally similar to slugs, though their target compounds differ. They are attracted to microbial activity, nitrogen availability, and moisture gradients. A decomposing watermelon rind sitting on the soil surface creates all three simultaneously. A 2018 study published by researchers at Cornell University's Department of Soil and Crop Sciences documented earthworm aggregation responses to surface-applied organic matter, finding that moist organic material with active microbial decomposition increased local earthworm density by an average of 47% within 48 hours compared to untreated control plots. 47% in 2 days from material that would otherwise be in a trash bag. The implications for your soil are not trivial. Each earthworm passing through the upper soil horizon increases aggregate stability, the structural integrity of soil particles that determines how well your ground holds air and water simultaneously. Their castings, deposited as they process organic material, contain plant-available nitrogen at concentrations 5 times higher than the surrounding soil. Their tunneling increases infiltration rates, meaning rainfall and irrigation reach root zones faster and with less surface runoff. A single square meter of soil hosting a healthy earthworm population can be turned over, physically processed, at a rate of several kilograms per year. You are not just trapping slugs beneath that rind, you are seeding an earthworm aggregation event in the exact location where your plants need the most biological activity. Now, credibility requires honesty. This method has real limitations, and I will not pretend otherwise. The watermelon rind trap is highly effective against surface-active nocturnal pests, slugs, millipedes, sowbugs, and certain cutworm species that forage above ground after dark. It will not address aphid colonies on your foliage. It will not reach root-feeding nematodes or thrips or spider mites. It is one tool in an ecological system, not a complete solution to every pest challenge your garden will face. The results also vary with temperature. Below 10 degrees Celsius, slug activity drops significantly and the fermentation rate of the rind slows, reducing the effective chemical plume. In cold climates, this technique is most powerful from late spring through early autumn. But within its range of application, the mechanism is sound, the evidence is documented, and the cost is exactly zero. Now you know why it works. Let us talk about how to actually do it, because the difference between a trap that collects a dozen slugs and one that collects nothing often comes down to details that no one bothers to explain. The first decision is timing. You are working with biology, which means you are working with cycles, and the cycle that matters here is the slug's nocturnal foraging window. In most climates, slug activity peaks between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m., with the highest surface movement occurring in the 2 hours after sunset, when soil temperature is still warm, but ambient humidity has risen. This means your trap needs to be in place and already generating its fermentation signal before that window opens. Do not place the rind at midnight and expect results. Set it down between 7 and 8 p.m., early enough for the cut surface to begin respiring, for the ester compounds to start diffusing outward through the soil surface, and for the microhabitat beneath the shell to reach the humidity level that makes it genuinely attractive as a shelter. The chemistry needs time to build. Give it that time. The second decision is placement. This is where most people get it wrong, not because they are careless, but because they think about it from a human perspective rather than a slug's. You are not placing the rind where you can easily see it in the morning. You are placing it where slug traffic is highest, and that is almost never in the open center of your garden bed. Slugs move along edges. They follow the boundary between bare soil and mulch, between the base of a raised bed wall in the growing area, between the drip line of a dense plant canopy and open ground. These transitional zones are their highways. Place your rind traps along these edges, not in the middle of your bed, and you will intercept far more traffic than a centrally placed trap ever could. Spacing matters too. A single rind generates a chemical plume with an effective attraction radius of approximately 1 meter under good humidity conditions, as the Wageningen and research suggested. This means traps placed more than 2 meters apart leave gaps in coverage, corridors where slugs can move through your garden without ever encountering a signal strong enough to redirect them. For a standard raised bed of 1.2 by 2.4 meters, 2 rind traps placed along opposite long edges will provide overlapping coverage across the entire bed. For larger in-ground plots, space traps every 1.5 to 2 meters along the perimeter and along any internal pathways where you have observed slug damage in the past. The size of the rind matters more than most people expect. A quarter-slice rind, the kind you get from cutting a personal-sized watermelon into wedges, does not have enough interior volume to create a stable microhabitat. The rind needs to be large enough to form a genuine dome when inverted, a hollow space of at least 15 centimeters in diameter and 7 to 8 centimeters of interior height at the center. This is the size that allows multiple slugs to shelter simultaneously, that retains enough humidity through the night to remain attractive, and that provides sufficient flesh surface area for meaningful fermentation to occur. When you eat a watermelon, think in halves, not slices. 1/2 of a standard medium watermelon yields 2 traps. one for each end of a raised bed. Morning collection is the step that most guides skip over, and it is critical to get right. You need to be outside before 7 a.m., ideally before full sunrise. As light intensity increases and soil surface temperature begins to rise, slugs will attempt to move out from beneath the rind and back into deeper soil cracks and debris. If you wait until mid-morning, you will lift the rind and find far fewer pests than were there an hour earlier. Move quickly and bring a container of water with a tablespoon of salt dissolved in it. Lift the rind cleanly in a single motion without tilting. Tilting gives mobile pests the opportunity to escape into the soil immediately beneath. Drop the rind and its occupants directly into the salt solution. Death is rapid, and the resulting liquid, diluted further with water, can be poured around the base of brassicas as a mild deterrent. The salt concentration at that dilution is too low to harm soil biology, but carries enough residual chemical signal to make the immediate area less attractive to new slug arrivals for 24 to 48 hours. After collection, you have two options for the rind itself. If it is still structurally intact, still holding its dome shape and retaining moisture, return it to the same position that evening. A single rind can function effectively for 3 to 4 nights before the flesh has decomposed sufficiently to collapse and lose its shelter geometry. At that point, do not discard it. Move it to the edge of your compost pile and half bury it. The decomposing rind will continue attracting earthworms to that location for another week, functioning as a passive soil amendment station while it finishes breaking down. Run this system consistently for 7 consecutive nights during your first deployment and record what you collect each morning. Most gardeners who do this report a sharp decline in captures between night 3 and night 5, not because the trap has stopped working, but because the local surface pest population has been substantially reduced. That declining capture rate is your data. It tells you that the system is working, that the pressure on your plants is dropping, and that you can shift to a maintenance schedule of 2 or 3 nights per week rather than every night. This is not a complicated system. It is a patient one. And patience, it turns out, is the one input that the $84 billion pesticide industry cannot sell you. I want to tell you about a farmer named Min. He works a half-hectare plot in the Red River Delta of northern Vietnam, the same river delta where farmers have been coaxing food from wet, heavy soil for more than 3,000 years. Min grows vegetables, mostly water spinach, bitter melon, and several varieties of leafy greens that his family sells at the local market 3 mornings a week. His entire annual income from that plot runs to the equivalent of roughly $800 US dollars. It is not a large margin. There is almost no room in it for error and absolutely no room in it for expensive inputs. 3 years ago, Min had a slug problem that was destroying his seedling beds every wet season. The agricultural supply store in his district sold metaldehyde pellets. The store owner told him it was the modern solution, the effective solution, the solution that serious farmers used. Min bought 2 bags. They cost him the equivalent of 4 days of market income. He applied them as directed. The slugs came back within 2 weeks after the first heavy rain washed the pellets into the irrigation channel that ran along the edge of his plot. He bought more bags. The cycle repeated. By the end of that wet season, he had spent the equivalent of 3 weeks of income on a product that had not solved his problem, only interrupted it temporarily at a cost his household could not comfortably absorb. The following year, his grandmother told him what her own grandmother had told her. You put the rind down at night, you lift it in the morning, you let the soil do the rest. Min was skeptical in the way that anyone is skeptical of something that sounds too simple, but he had watermelons growing at the edge of his plot that season, and he had nothing to lose. He cut the first ripe melon, kept both hollow halves, and placed them at the edges of his seedling bed that evening. The next morning, he collected 43 slugs from beneath 2 rinds. He returned the rinds that evening. By the end of the first week, his morning collections had dropped from 43 to 11. By the end of the second week, to 3. His seedlings, for the first time in 3 wet seasons, survived to transplant size without significant loss. He spent $0 additional dollars. He lost nothing. He gained a seedling survival rate that he described when a regional agricultural extension worker interviewed him as part of a traditional knowledge documentation project in 2021 as better than anything I paid for. I share this story not to romanticize poverty or to suggest that traditional knowledge is always superior to modern science. It is not always. There are genuine advances in agricultural technology that have saved lives and reduced hunger at scale, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that. But there is a particular kind of loss that happens when a grandmother's knowledge that was tested across hundreds of wet seasons, refined by people who could not afford to be wrong, gets displaced not by something better, but by something more profitable. That is not progress. That is substitution dressed up as progress. When you lift a watermelon rind from your garden bed at dawn and see what is gathered beneath it overnight, you are participating in something older than the industry that tried to make you forget it existed. You are using your observation, your timing, and your understanding of a living system to work with nature rather than against it. You are doing what Min's grandmother did and her grandmother before her, and farmers across 3 continents did before anyone had a reason to sell them an alternative. That knowledge belongs to you. It always did. The only thing that changed was who had an interest in making sure you never remembered it.